The chilling autumn wind whipped through the makeshift auction stage as Olivia Parker stared numbly at the leering faces before her, her wrists raw from rope burns and her spirit close to breaking. She'd never imagined ending up here, a young woman of 22 being sold alongside stolen horses and wanted criminals in a frontier town that had long since forsaken law and decency. The year was 1876, and the wild expanse of the Texas Panhandle cared little for the dreams Olivia had carried west from Boston. The frontier town of Dalhart was still young and lawless, a place where justice came from the barrel of a gun more often than any courthouse. Olivia's golden hair, now matted and filthy from 2 weeks of captivity, had once been her pride. Now it served only to attract unwanted attention from the crowd of rough men gathered below the wooden platform. "Next up, gentlemen," bellowed the auctioneer, a portly man with tobacco-stained teeth, a fine young filly straight from back east. Educated, they say. Reads and writes. Good for more than just cooking, if you take my meaning. Crude laughter rippled through the crowd. Olivia felt her stomach twist as she tried to make herself smaller. Impossible with the chains binding her to the other prisoners, all men. All criminals captured by bounty hunters and facing either a noose or hard labor, depending on who purchased them today. "Starting bid is $50, the auctioneer called. "60, shouted a gray-bearded man near the front, his eyes raking over her form with undisguised hunger. "75, countered another, a mine owner known for working men to death in his shaft outside town. Olivia closed her eyes, willing herself elsewhere. She had come west as a schoolteacher, answering an advertisement from a town desperate for education. But the stagecoach had been attacked, the other passengers killed, and she had been taken by outlaws who saw only profit in her capture. $150, called a new voice, quieter but carrying authority that silenced the crowd. Olivia's eyes flew open. At the back of the gathering stood a tall man, his face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Unlike the others, he stood straight, one hand resting casually on his gun belt. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and something in his posture spoke of discipline far removed from the rabble surrounding him. The auctioneer's eyes widened. "Well, now, we have a serious bidder." 150 going once. 200, snarled the mine owner. 250, countered the stranger, stepping forward into the light. Olivia caught her breath. The man was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with a face weathered by sun and wind but handsome in its severe way. His eyes, clear and blue as a mountain lake, didn't leer at her body but instead met her gaze directly. Something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, though she was certain they'd never met. 300, shouted another voice. $500, said the stranger, and this time the crowd fell completely silent, the auctioneer nearly choked. 500 for one woman, for the woman, the stranger corrected, and all the men on that platform. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The stranger had just bid on the entire lot of prisoners. "Sir, these men are criminals," the auctioneer sputtered. "Murderers and thieves. This auction usually separates, I know what they are," the stranger cut in, his voice level, "and I'll take them all, $500. He stepped closer to the platform, and now Olivia could see the silver star pinned to his vest, partially hidden by his long coat. "She's more innocent than them all," he added, nodding toward Olivia, "and I won't have her sold separately like cattle." The auctioneer hesitated, looking to the town's self-appointed mayor for guidance. The mayor, seeing the star and recognizing trouble when it walked into his town, gave a slight nod. 500 going once, twice, sold to the... He hesitated, uncertain of the man's position. "Ranger," the stranger supplied. "Ranger Reid Paxton. A Texas Ranger." Olivia felt a flutter of hope for the first time in weeks. As the crowd dispersed, many muttering in disappointment, Ranger Paxton approached the platform. He handed a leather pouch to the auctioneer and then climbed the steps to where the prisoners stood. "You can't do this," hissed one of the criminals, a wiry man with a scar across his throat. "I ain't going with no ranger." "You don't have a choice," Paxton replied calmly, producing a set of keys he'd acquired from the auctioneer. "I've got warrants for most of you. The rest will face a proper judge, not this mockery of justice." He unlocked Olivia's shackles first, his hands careful not to touch her skin. "Miss, are you hurt?" Olivia found her voice, though it emerged as a croak. "No, not badly." His eyes narrowed, taking in the bruises on her wrists and the cut on her cheek. "I've got a room at the hotel. You can clean up there while I arrange transport for these men. Where are you taking them?" She asked, rubbing her wrists. "Fort Worth. There's a federal marshal waiting for most of them." He turned to the men, who were watching with varying degrees of resignation and hostility. "Any of you give me trouble and I'll save the courts the bother. Understood?" None replied, but their silence was answer enough. Olivia stumbled slightly as she stepped forward, her legs weak from standing for hours. Paxton's hand shot out to steady her, strong and sure, but he removed it the moment she regained her balance. His restraint, his careful respect of her person after so many hands had grabbed and pushed her over the past weeks, nearly brought her to tears. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Let's get you somewhere safe, Miss Parker," she supplied. "Olivia Parker." "Miss Parker," he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her feel, for the first time since the stagecoach attack, that she might actually survive this ordeal. As they walked toward the hotel, the criminals shuffling behind them under Paxton's vigilant watch, Olivia could feel the curious stares of the townsfolk. She kept her eyes on the ground, shame washing over her despite her innocence. "Head up," Paxton said quietly. "You've done nothing wrong." She met his gaze, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. "How did you know that I wasn't, that I didn't belong with them?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've been tracking that gang for 2 weeks, knew they'd taken a woman hostage when I saw you up there." He paused. "Let's just say there's a difference between someone who chooses the outlaw life and someone caught in its path." At the hotel, Paxton secured a room for Olivia and arranged for a bath to be brought up. He placed his prisoners under guard in the town jail, promising to return shortly. True to his word, he knocked on her door an hour later. Olivia, freshly bathed and dressed in a simple dress the hotel proprietor's wife had loaned her, felt human again, though the memories of her captivity still clung to her like a shadow. "Come in," she called, standing as he entered. Paxton removed his hat, revealing dark hair with a touch of silver at the temples. "How are you feeling?" "Better," she admitted. "Though I'm not sure what happens next. I've lost everything I brought with me." Paxton nodded. "I figured as much. I've made arrangements for you to stay here tonight. Tomorrow, I'll escort you to Fort Worth with the prisoners. From there, you can decide if you want to continue west or return east." Olivia sank into a chair, the reality of her situation hitting her anew. "I don't have funds to do either." Paxton hesitated, then sat across from her. "Why did you come west, Miss Parker?" "I'm a teacher." "There was an advertisement for a schoolteacher in a town called Mercer Creek." She smiled ruefully. "I wanted adventure to help build something new. My parents died last year and there was nothing keeping me in Boston." "Mercer Creek is about 100 miles south of here," Paxton said. "Good people there. They've been waiting for their teacher for some time." Hope sparked within her. "You know it, passed through about a month ago. They were building a schoolhouse." He studied her for a moment. "If you still want that position, I can make sure you get there safely." "Why would you do that for me?" Paxton's expression softened slightly. "Because this country needs more builders than destroyers, Miss Parker. Teachers plant seeds that grow long after they're gone." His words, unexpected from this hard-edged man, touched something deep within her. "Then I would be very grateful for your assistance, Ranger Paxton." "Reid," he corrected. "Just Reid is fine when it's not official business." "Reid," she repeated, testing the name, "and you may call me Olivia." A connection formed between them in that moment, delicate as a spider's silk, but somehow stronger than the chains that had bound her hours earlier. Neither acknowledged it, but both felt its presence as surely as the wooden floor beneath their feet. "Get some rest, Olivia," Reid said, rising and replacing his hat. "We leave at dawn." Dawn came too quickly, the pale light filtering through thin curtains as Olivia dressed in the same borrowed clothes. She had slept fitfully, dreams of her captivity mingling with the strange new hope that Reid Paxton's arrival had kindled within her. Reid was waiting in the hotel lobby, his prisoners already loaded into a reinforced wagon outside. He looked as though he hadn't slept at all, but his eyes were alert as they swept over her. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, clutching the small bundle of provisions the hotel proprietor's wife had pressed upon her: a spare dress, some basic toiletries, and a few biscuits wrapped in cloth. The journey to Fort Worth would take 3 days by wagon. Reid had arranged for Olivia to ride on the wagon's bench beside him, while the prisoners sat shackled in the back, guarded by a deputy Reid had found willing to make the journey. As they pulled away from Dalhart, Olivia found herself studying Reid's profile against the rising sun. His jaw was set in determination, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon and occasionally checking on his prisoners. "How long have you been a ranger?" she asked after they'd traveled some miles in companionable silence. 8 years, he replied. "Before that, cavalry, fought in the war when I was hardly more than a boy." "The Civil War," she tried to calculate his age. He nodded. "Joined up at 16, lied about my age, wasn't the only one." "That would make him around 32 now," she reasoned. "Which side?" she asked cautiously. "Union," he said simply. "My family came west from Pennsylvania before the war, didn't own slaves, didn't believe in the institution." Olivia nodded, relieved. Her own family had been staunch abolitionists, her father a contributor to anti-slavery newspapers. "And you?" Reid asked. "What brought a Boston schoolteacher west besides an advertisement?" Olivia considered the question. "Freedom, I suppose. After my parents died, Boston felt confining. All those expectations about how a young woman should behave, whom she should marry. Out here, it seemed like I might be valued for my mind rather than my prospects as a wife." Reid's lips quirked upward. "The West has its own expectations for women, just different ones." "I'm discovering that," she admitted. They lapsed into silence again, but it was comfortable, each lost in their own thoughts as the wagon rolled southward across the vast Texas landscape. The prisoners were largely silent, too, except for occasional muttered complaints about the jolting wagon or requests for water. Reid treated them firmly but not cruelly, ensuring they received water and basic rations. Only once did he have to intercede when two began arguing, his stern voice immediately silencing them. That night, they made camp by a small creek. The deputy, a grizzled man named Morton, kept watch over the prisoners while Reid built a fire and prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork. Olivia insisted on helping, glad to have something to do with her hands. As they worked side by side, she became acutely aware of Reid's presence: the careful way he moved, the quiet strength in his hands, the occasional brush of his arm against hers that sent unexpected warmth through her body. "You've been kind to me," she said as they ate. "I won't forget it." Reid looked up from his plate, the firelight catching in his eyes. "It's nothing special, just doing what's right." "Many men wouldn't see it that way," she countered. "Those men at the auction." Reid's expression darkened. "Those weren't men, they were jackals." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. "You seem to take it personally." He was silent for so long that Olivia thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her ears. "My sister was taken by Comancheros when she was 15. By the time we found her," he shook his head. "No woman should be treated as property, bought and sold like those men intended to do with you." Olivia's heart ached for him, for the pain evident in the tight line of his mouth. "I'm sorry about your sister." "It was a long time ago," he said, but she could tell the wound was still raw even after all these years. "Get some sleep. I'll take first watch." He'd arranged a sleeping area for her slightly apart from the men, sheltered by the wagon. As she lay wrapped in the blankets he'd provided, Olivia found herself watching Reid's silhouette against the starlit sky, wondering what other sorrows he carried beneath his composed exterior. The next day brought them deeper into settled country, the landscape gradually changing from open prairie to rolling hills, dotted with small farms and ranches. They passed other travelers on the road, and Reid always positioned himself between Olivia and any strangers, his hand never far from his weapon. By midday, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, and the air had grown heavy with the promise of rain. "Storm coming," Reid observed, glancing at the sky. "We should find shelter before it hits." They pushed on, hoping to reach a way station marked on Reid's map, but the storm moved faster than anticipated. Within an hour, fat raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards. There. Reid pointed to a shape looming through the rain, a barn standing alone in a field, no farmhouse in sight. He guided the horses toward it, and as they drew closer, Olivia could see it was an old structure, partially collapsed on one side but with most of the roof intact. Reid jumped down from the wagon and pushed open the large doors, then led the team inside. The interior was musty but dry, with old hay still scattered about. A few farm implements hung on the walls, suggesting the place had been abandoned rather than destroyed. "Lucky break," Reid commented as he secured the horses. "Morton, keep the prisoners in the wagon, I'll check the loft." While Reid climbed to the upper level, Olivia helped Morton distribute hardtack and jerky to the prisoners. One of them, younger than the others with a boyish face despite his criminal status, caught her eye. "Thank you, madam," he said quietly as she handed him his portion. "You're kind considering." "Considering what?" she asked. "That we was all being sold together must have been frightening for you." Olivia studied him curiously. "What's your name?" "Tommy, madam, Tommy Wilkes." "And what are you wanted for, Mr. Wilkes?" The young man looked down. "Horse theft, madam. Wasn't my idea, but I went along with it. Stupid decision." "Quiet over there," Morton growled, but without real menace. Reid descended from the loft, brushing dust from his hands. "Loft's dry enough. Miss Parker, you can rest up there while we wait out the storm. Should be more comfortable than down here with this lot." Olivia nodded, though she felt a twinge of guilt at having better accommodations than the others. Reid seemed to read her thoughts. "They're criminals, Olivia," he said softly. "Even the young one, don't let yourself forget that." She climbed the ladder to the loft, finding it, as Reid had described, dusty but dry, with enough old hay to make a comfortable seat. Through cracks in the roof, she could see the rain pouring down, turning the world beyond into a gray haze. The storm's fury was impressive, wind howling around the old structure and making the timbers creak. After about an hour, footsteps on the ladder announced Reid's arrival. He carried a tin cup of coffee, which he offered to her. "Thought you might want this. Gets chilly during storms." "Thank you." She took the cup, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Will you join me?" He hesitated, then settled beside her on the hay, leaving a respectful distance between them. For a while, they simply listened to the rain drumming on the roof. "That young one, Tommy," Olivia finally said. "He seems different from the others." Reid sighed. "First offense, far as I know, fell in with a bad crowd after his parents died. Judge might show leniency, especially if he testifies against the others. You know a lot about him." "I make it my business to know about the people I hunt," Reid replied. "Helps to understand what drives them. Some are just born bad, but others." He shrugged. "Sometimes circumstances push people down paths they wouldn't otherwise choose. Like you becoming a ranger because of what happened to your sister." The question slipped out before she could reconsider it. Reid looked at her sharply, then his expression softened. "That's part of it, yes. And the rest." He was quiet for so long that Olivia thought she'd overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice had a different quality to it, as though he was allowing her to see something he usually kept hidden. "After the war I was lost, seen too much death, too much hatred. Couldn't go back to Pennsylvania, nothing there for me anymore. Texas was wild, needed men who could bring some kind of order." He ran a hand through his hair. "Thought maybe if I could make even a small part of it safer, I'd be doing some good in the world." "I think you are," Olivia said softly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Olivia felt something shift between them, that delicate connection from before strengthening, deepening into something neither of them had anticipated. "You're an unusual woman, Olivia Parker," he said finally. She smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one." His eyes lingered on her face for a moment longer than necessary, then he stood. "Storm's letting up. We should move on if we want to make any decent distance before nightfall." As he descended the ladder, Olivia remained seated, trying to calm the strange fluttering in her chest. She had come west seeking a new beginning, never imagining it would include being captured by outlaws, nearly sold at auction, and rescued by a ranger who stirred feelings in her that no Boston gentleman ever had. The next day and a half of travel passed without incident. Reid grew more alert as they approached Fort Worth. explaining that escaped prisoners sometimes had friends waiting to ambush lawmen bringing captives in. But they reached the fort without trouble, the solid walls and cavalry patrols a welcome sight after days on the open road. Reid turned his prisoners over to the federal marshal, spending several hours completing paperwork and giving statements about each man's crimes. He made a point of speaking to the judge about Tommy Wilkes, suggesting the young man might be rehabilitated with the right guidance. Olivia waited in a small anteroom, feeling strangely bereft at the thought that this might be the end of her time with Reid. He had promised to help her reach Mercer Creek, but now that they were in a sizable town with regular stagecoach service, perhaps he would consider his duty fulfilled. When he finally emerged from his meeting with the marshal, his expression was unreadable. "I've arranged lodging for you at a respectable boarding house," he said. "The marshal's wife runs it. You'll be safe there." "And tomorrow?" she asked, trying to keep the apprehension from her voice. "Tomorrow we'll see about getting you to Mercer Creek." He hesitated. "I've been assigned a new case, but it's in the same direction. If you don't mind waiting a few days while I gather information here, I can escort you personally." Relief washed over her. "I don't mind waiting." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Good. That's good." The boarding house was clean and comfortable, run by a motherly woman named Mrs. Hawkins who clucked over Olivia's thin frame and immediately set about putting some meat on those bones, as she put it. Reid left Olivia there with a promise to return the following evening for dinner. Alone in her room, Olivia found herself standing before the small mirror, really looking at herself for the first time in weeks. The woman who stared back was both familiar and strange thinner, certainly with new lines of worry around her eyes, but also somehow stronger. There was a determination in her gaze that hadn't been there in Boston. "Who are you becoming, Olivia Parker?" she whispered to her reflection. The next day, Mrs. Hawkins took Olivia shopping, insisting she needed proper attire if she was to be a schoolteacher. The marshal had provided a small stipend for Olivia from a victims' relief fund, enough to purchase 2 serviceable dresses, undergarments, and a sturdy pair of boots more suitable for Western life than her city shoes had been. "That ranger of yours is well respected around here, Mrs. Hawkins commented as they walked back to the boarding house, parcels in hand. "He's not my ranger," Olivia corrected, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. Mrs. Hawkins gave her a knowing look. "Maybe not yet, but I've seen the way he looks at you. Been married 30 years, I know that look." Olivia chose not to respond, but the woman's words echoed in her mind as she prepared for dinner that evening. She wore one of her new dresses, a deep blue calico with white trim that Mrs. Hawkins assured her brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her hair up simply but neatly, and even allowed herself a touch of the rose-scented water Mrs. Hawkins had offered. When Reid arrived, promptly at 6, Olivia was waiting in the parlor. He paused in the doorway when he saw her, his usual composure momentarily slipping to reveal something that looked very much like admiration. "Miss Parker," he greeted her, his voice a touch lower than usual. "You look rested." "Thank you, Ranger Paxton," she replied, a small smile playing at her lips. "You look rather well yourself." And he did. He'd clearly bathed and shaved and wore a clean shirt and vest beneath his usual long coat. His gun belt remained, she noted, probably as much a part of him as his right arm after so many years. Dinner was served in the boarding house dining room, where they were joined by 2 elderly sisters who lived permanently at the establishment and a traveling salesman passing through town. The conversation was general and pleasant, focusing on local news and the upcoming harvest festival. Throughout the meal, Olivia was acutely aware of Reid beside her, the careful way he ate, the respectful attention he paid to the elderly sister's stories, the occasional brush of his arm against hers, that scent, that now familiar warmth through her body. Once, when their eyes met over the apple pie dessert, she saw something in his gaze that made her heart beat faster. After dinner, Reid suggested a short walk to aid digestion. The night was clear and cool, the streets of Fort Worth relatively quiet as they strolled side by side. "I've been making inquiries about Mercer Creek," Reid said after they'd walked in comfortable silence for a while. "The stagecoach runs within 10 miles of it twice a week, We could catch tomorrow's if you're eager to start your position. Olivia considered this. And your new case. You mentioned it was in the same direction. It is, a gang operating out of the hills near there, nothing for you to worry about. He glanced at her. I could escort you to the stagecoach, make sure you're safely aboard. She stopped walking, turning to face him directly. Is that what you want? To send me on ahead. Reid looked surprised by her directness. It's not about what I want, it's about getting you safely to where you need to be. And if I said I'd prefer to travel with you, even if it takes longer, something flickered in his eyes, hope, perhaps, quickly masked by practicality. It could be dangerous, Olivia. My work isn't always predictable. After what I've already survived, I think I can handle a bit of unpredictability. She held his gaze steadily. Unless you'd prefer not to have my company. Reid ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of internal conflict. Your company is not unpleasant. A laugh escaped her at his careful understatement. High praise indeed, Ranger Paxton. The corner of his mouth lifted in that almost smile. I'm not a man given to flowery speech, Miss Parker. No, she agreed softly. You're a man of actions rather than words, and your actions have shown me more kindness than most people's pretty speeches ever have. They stood there on the quiet street, the distance between them both physical and something more, a gap of experience, of background, of the different lives they'd led. And yet, Olivia felt, there was something bridging that gap, something neither of them had expected to find. We'll leave the day after tomorrow, Reid finally said. Together, but you'll follow my instructions without question if we encounter trouble. Agreed, Olivia nodded, satisfaction warming her chest. Agreed. As they turned back toward the boarding house, Reid hesitantly offered his arm. Olivia placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her fingertips. They walked in silence, but it was a silence filled with possibility. The next day, Reid was occupied with his investigation, meeting informants and conferring with the local sheriff. Olivia spent the time writing a letter to the town council of Mercer Creek, explaining her delayed arrival and confirming her continued interest in the teaching position. She also, at Mrs. Hawkins' insistence, purchased a few more practical items for frontier life: a small knife she could keep in her boot, a waterproof cloak for rainy weather, and a wide-brimmed hat to shield her fair skin from the Texas sun. A lady can be practical without sacrificing her dignity, Mrs. Hawkins declared as she showed Olivia how to secure the knife sheath properly in her boot. That evening, Reid returned looking tired but satisfied. We leave at first light, he told her over dinner. Pack only what you need. We'll be traveling light and fast. Trouble? She asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. Information, he corrected. One of my sources says the gang is planning something big in 3 days' time. I need to get there first. Olivia nodded, excitement mingling with apprehension in her chest. I'll be ready. True to her word, she was waiting in the boarding house foyer when Reid arrived before dawn, her new belongings packed in a small satchel. He raised an eyebrow at her promptness, but nodded approvingly. Outside, he led her to where 2 horses waited, a sturdy bay gelding for him and a smaller, gentle-looking mare for her. Can you ride? He asked, suddenly looking uncertain. Olivia smiled. I grew up in Boston, not on the moon. Yes, I can ride, though perhaps not as well as you. Relief crossed his features. Good. It's faster than the wagon, and we need to cover ground quickly. They set out as the first rays of sun touched the eastern horizon, riding southwest toward the hill country where Mercer Creek lay nestled in a fertile valley. Reid set a pace that was brisk but not punishing, occasionally glancing back to ensure Olivia was managing well. She was. Despite her modest assessment of her riding skills, Olivia sat her mount with natural grace, adjusting quickly to the mare's gait and movements. The open landscape around them filled her with a sense of freedom she'd never experienced in the confines of Boston society. It's beautiful, she commented during a brief rest to water the horses at a small stream. I can see why people are willing to endure hardship to live out here. Reid, checking his mare's hooves, looked up at her. Most don't notice the beauty, too busy surviving. Perhaps survival and appreciating beauty aren't mutually exclusive, she suggested. Maybe noticing the good things helps people endure the difficult ones. He straightened, studying her with that intensity that seemed to see beneath her surface. You're a philosopher as well as a teacher, Miss Parker. Olivia, she reminded him, and hardly a philosopher, just someone who believes there's value in finding joy where you can. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes. Olivia, he said, and the way he spoke her name sent a pleasant shiver through her. They continued riding through the day, stopping only briefly to eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, Reid led them toward a stand of cottonwood trees near another stream, a good campsite with water, shelter, and visibility of the surrounding area. We'll stop here for the night, he announced, dismounting and offering a hand to help Olivia down. The brief contact as her hand met his sent that now familiar warmth through her again, and from the way his eyes darkened slightly, she wondered if he felt it too. They worked together to make camp, Reid demonstrating a quiet efficiency born of years on the trail. He showed Olivia how to properly picket the horses, how to build a small, smokeless fire, and where to place her bedroll for maximum protection from the elements. As darkness fell, they sat beside the fire eating beans Reid had heated in a small tin pot, supplemented with biscuits Mrs. Hawkins had packed for them. The night was clear, stars emerging in brilliant profusion across the vast Texas sky. Will you tell me about your case? Olivia asked after they'd eaten. What this gang has done to warrant a ranger's attention. Reid poked at the fire with a stick, considering his answer. They started with cattle rustling, moved up to stagecoach robberies. 3 months ago, they murdered a family husband, wife, and their 12-year-old son who witnessed them hiding stolen goods on their property. Olivia's hand went to her throat. That's terrible. It is. His voice was hard. Their leader is a man named Blackburn. Used to ride with Quantrill's raiders during the war, developed a taste for violence he couldn't give up when peace came. And you think they're planning something in Mercer Creek? Reid nodded. Not in the town itself. There's a payroll shipment coming through for the new railroad spur they're building, $20,000. The gang plans to hit it about 10 miles east of town in a narrow pass through the hills. How will you stop them? You're just one man. I sent telegrams to 2 other rangers who were working nearby. They'll meet us tomorrow evening. He looked at her, his expression grave. Which is why I need you to understand something important. When we reach the rendezvous point, you'll stay there with one of the rangers while I and the other go after the gang. Olivia wanted to protest, but recognized the logic in his plan. I understand. I won't do anything to compromise your mission. Reid's posture relaxed slightly. Thank you. They fell silent again, the crackling fire and distant calls of night birds the only sounds. Olivia found her gaze drawn repeatedly to Reid's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows as he stared into the flames, lost in thought. What will you do? She asked eventually. After you capture this gang, he glanced at her, surprised by the question. Another case, I suppose. There's never a shortage of work for a ranger. Is that what you want, to keep hunting outlaws until? She trailed off, not wanting to voice the likely end of such a career. Reid was quiet for a long moment. I used to be sure it was, now. He shrugged. A man gets tired of living in the saddle after a while, starts thinking about other things. What other things? Olivia pressed gently. His eyes met hers across the fire, and in them she saw longing quickly masked. Things that aren't meant for men like me. A home, stability, maybe even a family someday. Why aren't those things meant for you? My line of work doesn't exactly lend itself to settling down, he said, a hint of bitterness in his tone. Hard to build a life when you might not come home. Olivia thought about this. But you could leave the Rangers, couldn't you? If you found something or someone worth staying in one place for, the look Reid gave her then was so intense it nearly stole her breath. I could, he said softly, if I had reason enough. The weight of unspoken possibilities hung between them, as tangible as the night air. Olivia's heart beat faster, aware they were approaching territory neither had intended to explore when this journey began. We should sleep, Reid said finally, breaking the tension. Long ride tomorrow. They settled into their respective bedrolls, positioned on opposite sides of the fire but still within sight of each other. Olivia lay awake for some time, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the steady rhythm of Reid's breathing as he slept, his hand never far from his gun even in repose. She had come west seeking a new beginning, a place to build a life on her own terms. She hadn't expected to find herself drawn to a man like Reid Paxton complex, wounded by his past yet still driven by an unwavering sense of justice. A man who saw her strength rather than just her vulnerability, who treated her as an equal deserving of respect. As sleep finally claimed her, Olivia wondered what awaited them in the days ahead, and whether the connection growing between them might survive the dangers Reid faced in his pursuit of justice. Morning came with a heavy mist clinging to the ground, obscuring visibility beyond a few yards. Reid was already up when Olivia awoke, brewing coffee over a rekindled fire and studying a worn map spread on his knee. "Weather might work in our favor," he commented as she joined him. "Harder for lookouts to spot us approaching." They ate a quick breakfast and broke camp efficiently, back on the trail as the sun began burning off the mist. The landscape gradually changed as they rode southwest, flat plains giving way to rolling hills covered in scrub oak and cedar. The air grew warmer, carrying the scent of sun-baked earth and wildflowers. By midday, they had entered a region of limestone ridges and hidden valleys. Reid grew more vigilant, frequently consulting his map and occasionally stopping to study the horizon through a small brass spyglass. "We're getting close to their territory," he explained during one such pause. "Need to be careful now." They continued at a more cautious pace, Reid leading them along game trails and dry creek beds rather than the more obvious paths. By late afternoon, they had reached a small, sheltered canyon with a spring bubbling from the rock face at its far end. "This is the rendezvous point," Reid said, dismounting. "The other rangers should be here by sundown." Olivia slid from her mare, stretching her stiff muscles after the long day's ride. "What do we do until then?" "Rest the horses. Prepare." Reid's expression was focused, his mind clearly already on the confrontation to come. He secured their mounts in a grassy area near the spring, then began checking his weapons, a Winchester rifle, his Colt revolver, and a smaller Derringer he kept in his boot. Olivia watched him for a moment, then busied herself setting up a small camp. There would be no fire tonight. Reid had explained too risky with the gang potentially having scouts in the area. As the shadows lengthened across the canyon floor, Reid grew increasingly tense, frequently checking the entrance to their hiding place. When hoofbeats finally sounded outside, he motioned for Olivia to get behind a large boulder and drew his revolver in one smooth motion. "Paxton, you in there," called a voice. Reid relaxed marginally. "Mitchell, that you, me and Cooper both," came the reply. Two riders entered the canyon, both wearing dusty trail clothes and rangers' badges similar to Reid's. The first was a burly man with a thick mustache, the second leaner with sun-bleached hair and a weather-beaten face. Reid holstered his weapon and stepped forward to greet them, exchanging firm handshakes. "Glad you made it. Any trouble on the trail?" "Nothing worth mentioning," said the mustached man Mitchell, Olivia presumed. His eyes found her as she emerged from behind the boulder. "This the schoolteacher you telegraphed about?" Reid nodded. "Miss Olivia Parker. She was captured by the Waller gang and nearly sold at auction in Dalhart. I happened to be there tracking them and intervened." "Fortunate timing," commented the blond man Cooper with raised eyebrows. "Indeed it was," Olivia said, stepping forward. "Ranger Paxton saved me from a fate I prefer not to contemplate." Mitchell studied her with frank curiosity. "And now you're bound for Mercer Creek to teach?" "Yes, once this current situation is resolved." She straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. "I understand I'll be staying here with one of you while Ranger Paxton and the other pursue the Blackburn gang." The Rangers exchanged glances, and she sensed a silent communication passing between them. Mitchell finally nodded. "That's right, madam. I'll be staying with you while Paxton and Cooper handle the gang. Safer that way." The four of them settled in the deepening twilight, sharing a cold meal as the Rangers discussed their strategy in low voices. The payroll shipment would pass through the narrow canyon to the east of Mercer Creek around noon the following day. According to Reid's information, Blackburn and his men, numbering around 8, planned to ambush it there. "We need to get into position before dawn," Reid explained, sketching a rough map in the dirt. "There's a ridge overlooking the canyon here. If we can secure it before they arrive, we'll have the high ground." "What about the payroll guards?" Cooper asked. "They need to be warned." "I've sent word through a trusted source in Mercer Creek," Reid replied. "They'll be prepared, but will proceed as planned to avoid tipping off Blackburn." The discussion continued as full darkness fell, the Rangers working out signals and contingency plans. Olivia listened quietly, impressed by their methodical approach and the easy way they worked together despite what appeared to be infrequent collaboration. When the plans were finalized, Mitchell and Cooper rolled out their bedrolls while Reid took first watch at the canyon entrance. Olivia found herself unable to sleep, too aware that tomorrow Reid would be facing dangerous men who wouldn't hesitate to kill him. After tossing restlessly for nearly an hour, she rose quietly and made her way to where Reid sat on a boulder, his rifle across his knees as he scanned the darkness beyond. "You should be resting," he said without turning, somehow aware of her approach despite her attempt at silence. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, settling beside him. "Too much on my mind." Reid glanced at her, his face half illuminated by the starlight. "Worried about tomorrow, aren't you?" she countered softly. A slight smile touched his lips. "It's my job to worry about tomorrow. Yours is to stay safe and become the teacher Mercer Creek needs." "I'm finding it difficult to compartmentalize my concerns so neatly," Olivia said, "especially when—" She hesitated, uncertain how to express the feelings that had been growing within her since he'd first appeared at that dreadful auction. Reid turned to face her fully, his expression softening. "When what, Olivia?" She gathered her courage. "When I've come to care what happens to you." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity, though it was likely only seconds. Reid's eyes, reflecting the starlight, searched her face with an intensity that made her heart race. "You barely know me," he said finally, his voice low and rough. "I know enough," she replied simply. "I know you're a good man, Reid Paxton. A man who saves schoolteachers from being sold to the highest bidder. A man who seeks justice but still shows compassion to young criminals who might be reformed. A man who treats a woman who's lost everything with dignity and respect." Reid's hand moved toward hers where it rested on the rock between them, then hesitated, hovering just above her fingers. "You make me sound better than I am. Or perhaps you've been too long in the company of the worst of humanity to recognize your own worth," she suggested gently. His hand finally covered hers, warm and calloused from years of hard work and harder living. "You're an extraordinary woman, Olivia Parker." The simple contact of his hand on her sent warmth spiraling through her body. Slowly, giving him every opportunity to pull away, she leaned closer until their shoulders touched. "Promise me you'll be careful tomorrow," she whispered. Reid's fingers tightened around hers. "I'm always careful." "Not enough," she countered. "Be more careful than usual." She broke off, surprised by the intensity of her own feelings. "I would very much like you to return safely." In the silver light of the stars, she saw something shift in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. Slowly, with a gentleness that belied his strength, he raised his free hand to her cheek. "I'll do my best," he promised, his voice barely above a whisper. "For you." The moment hung between them, fragile and precious. Olivia felt herself drawn toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. For a breathless second, she thought he might kiss her, and realized with startling clarity that she wanted him to, but a sound from the camp behind them, Cooper turning in his sleep, broke the spell. Reid drew back slightly, though his hand remained on hers. "You should try to rest," he said, reluctance evident in his tone. "Tomorrow will be a long day for all of us." Olivia nodded, knowing he was right but loath to break this connection between them. "Wake me before you leave in the morning. I'd like to say goodbye properly." Something flickered in Reid's eyes, hope, perhaps, or promise. "I will." She returned to her bedroll, her hand still tingling from his touch, and fell asleep with the memory of his warmth beside her and the look in his eyes when he'd promised to return safely. True to his word, Reid gently woke her before dawn. The sky was still dark, stars fading as the first hint of light touched the eastern horizon. He knelt beside her bedroll, already fully equipped for the day ahead, his expression solemn in the pre-dawn light. "We're heading out," he said softly. "Mitchell will stay with you. If we're not back by sundown, he'll escort you to Mercer Creek." Olivia sat up, suddenly fully awake. "You'll be back before sundown," she said with more confidence than she felt. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, madam." She rose to her feet, conscious of Cooper preparing the horses nearby and Mitchell checking supplies. This wasn't the private farewell she'd imagined, but she wouldn't let Reid leave without saying what needed to be said. "Reid," she began, keeping her voice low. "I meant what I said last night." "Please be careful," he nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've got something worth coming back for now." The simple declaration, spoken without embellishment but with profound sincerity, stole her breath. Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pressed something into her hand, a small, smooth stone, unremarkable except for the thread of quartz running through its center that caught the growing light. "Found it yesterday at the stream," he explained. "Reminded me of you, something beautiful in the midst of the ordinary." Olivia closed her fingers around the stone, touched beyond words by the unexpected gesture. Acting on impulse, she stepped forward and kissed his cheek, letting her lips linger just long enough to feel the warmth of his skin and the slight roughness of morning stubble. "For luck," she whispered as she drew back. Reid's eyes had darkened, and for a moment she thought he might pull her into a proper embrace, heedless of their audience. Instead, he took her hand, the one holding the stone, and pressed it briefly to his heart. "I'll return for this," he said, his meaning clear. He wasn't just referring to the stone. Then he was gone, striding toward the horses where Cooper waited. Olivia watched as they mounted up, Reid glancing back once to meet her eyes before they rode out of the canyon, disappearing into the lingering shadows of night. Mitchell approached as the sound of hoofbeats faded. "They'll be fine, madam." Paxton's the best tracker in the Rangers, and Cooper's no slouch in a fight. Olivia nodded, still clutching the stone Reid had given her. "I know, it's just hard to watch someone ride toward danger," Mitchell finished for her, his expression sympathetic. "Especially someone you care for." She looked at him sharply, but there was no judgment in his weathered face, only understanding. "Is it that obvious?" A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Only to someone who's seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." Heat rose to Olivia's cheeks, but before she could formulate a response, Mitchell tactfully changed the subject. "Let's have some coffee and breakfast. Going to be a long day of waiting." And it was. Hours crawled by with excruciating slowness as Olivia tried to occupy herself with small tasks, mending a tear in her skirt, helping Mitchell tend the horses, even practicing lesson plans in her head for her future students. All the while, her mind kept returning to Reid, imagining him positioned on that ridge, waiting for dangerous men with guns and no compunction about using them. Around noon, they heard distant gunfire, several sharp reports echoing off the canyon walls. Mitchell immediately went on alert, positioning himself at the canyon entrance with his rifle ready. "That'll be the ambush," he said grimly. "Sounds like Paxton and Cooper have engaged." Olivia's heart hammered in her chest as more shots rang out, now accompanied by faint shouts too distant to distinguish words. The exchange continued for what felt like an eternity, but was likely only minutes, before falling silent once more. "Now we wait," Mitchell said, relaxing his posture slightly but maintaining his vigilance. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the gunfire had been. Olivia found herself pacing the small confines of their camp, the stone Reid had given her clutched tightly in her palm like a talisman. Hours passed with no word, the sun climbing to its zenith, and then beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Mitchell maintained a stoic calm that Olivia envied, cleaning his weapons and occasionally scanning the approaches to their hiding place with his spyglass. It was late afternoon when they finally heard hoofbeats approaching. Mitchell immediately positioned himself protectively in front of Olivia, rifle raised. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "Could be some of Blackburn's men who escaped the ambush." Olivia's heart seemed to stop as they waited, the sound of horses drawing steadily closer. Then a familiar voice called out, "Mitchell, it's Paxton and Cooper, coming in with prisoners." Relief flooded through her with such intensity that her knees nearly buckled. Mitchell lowered his weapon, a grin spreading across his face. "Sounds like they got him," he said, glancing back at Olivia with a wink. Moments later, Reid and Cooper appeared at the canyon entrance, leading 4 men with bound hands on exhausted horses. Reid looked dusty and weary, a blood-stained bandage visible on his upper arm but otherwise intact. His eyes immediately sought Olivia's, a tired smile crossing his face when he found her safe. 4 prisoners?" Mitchell asked, stepping forward to help secure them. Cooper nodded grimly. 3 others didn't make it, including Blackburn. Went down fighting. 1 got away, but he's wounded bad, won't get far. As the Rangers secured their prisoners, Olivia approached Reid, her eyes fixed on his bandaged arm. "You're hurt." He glanced down as if surprised to find the wound there. "Just a graze. Bullet barely touched me." Despite his dismissive tone, she could see the strain in his face, the way he held himself carefully to avoid aggravating the injury. "Let me look at it," she insisted. "It needs proper cleaning at the very least." Reid hesitated, then nodded. "After we get the prisoners sorted." It was another hour before the immediate concerns were addressed. The prisoners were secured, horses tended, and plans made to transport the captives to Fort Worth the following day. Cooper would ride to Mercer Creek to inform the town officials that the threat had been neutralized, while Mitchell would help Reid escort the prisoners to justice. As twilight descended on the canyon, Olivia finally had a chance to examine Reid's wound. He sat on a boulder near the spring, having removed his shirt to reveal the hasty bandage Cooper had applied in the field. Olivia carefully unwound the blood-stiffened cloth, wincing at the angry furrow the bullet had carved across his upper arm. "This is more than a graze," she chided, gently cleaning the wound with water from the spring. "You could have bled to death." Reid watched her work, his expression unreadable. "Wouldn't be the first time I've been shot." "That doesn't make it acceptable," she countered, applying a fresh bandage from the medical supplies Mitchell had produced. Her fingers brushed against his skin, warm despite the blood loss, and she felt him tense slightly at her touch. When she finished, Reid caught her hand before she could withdraw it. "Thank you," he said simply. Olivia met his gaze, seeing in it exhaustion but also something warmer, more intimate. "I'm just glad you came back," she replied softly, his fingers tightened around hers. "I made a promise." They remained like that for a long moment, connected by touch and gaze, until Cooper called from across the camp that coffee was ready. The moment broke, but something had solidified between them, an understanding that transcended words. That night, as they sat around a small fire sharing a meal, Cooper regaled them with the tale of the ambush. The Rangers had positioned themselves perfectly, catching Blackburn's gang by surprise just as they moved to attack the payroll shipment. The guards, forewarned, had been ready with additional firepower of their own. "You should have seen Paxton here," Cooper said, gesturing with his coffee cup. When Blackburn tried to use one of the payroll guards as a shield, Paxton made a shot I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't witnessed it myself. Caught Blackburn clean through the shoulder, made him drop his hostage without harming the guard. Reid looked uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing my job." "Your job, maybe, but damn fine work all the same," Mitchell commented. "That gang's been terrorizing 3 counties for months. You'll get commendations for this." As the conversation continued, Olivia found herself watching Reid the way the firelight played across his features, the quiet dignity with which he accepted his colleague's praise while deflecting the focus from himself. He caught her looking once and held her gaze across the flames, a private moment in the midst of company. Later, as the Rangers took turns standing watch, Olivia found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. When she heard Reid move to take his shift, she waited a few minutes before quietly joining him at his post overlooking the canyon entrance. "You should be sleeping," he said, echoing his words from the night before. "So should you, especially after being wounded," she countered, settling beside him on the rocky outcrop. "But I wanted to talk to you. Alone." Reid turned to face her, his expression open in a way it rarely was around others. What about? Olivia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. About what happens next. Tomorrow you'll take those prisoners to Fort Worth and Cooper will escort me to Mercer Creek. Our paths will diverge. Yes, Reid acknowledged, his voice neutral though his eyes betrayed him. Is that what you want? She asked directly. For our paths to diverge permanently, a long silence followed, broken only by the soft hooting of an owl somewhere in the distance. When Reid finally spoke, his voice was low, intimate. No, he said simply. It's not what I want. Olivia's heart quickened. What do you want, Reid? He looked away briefly, as if gathering his thoughts, then met her gaze with newfound resolve. I want to see you settled safely in Mercer Creek. I want to know you're teaching those children and building the life you came west to find. He paused, then added more softly, and I want to be part of that life if you'll have me. Joy blossomed in Olivia's chest, warm and expansive. I would have you, she whispered. Very much so. Reid's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining naturally. I can't abandon my duty, he warned. The prisoners must be delivered to justice, but afterward. He squeezed her hand gently. Afterward, I'll come to Mercer Creek. And then, she prompted, a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features in the starlight. And then, Olivia Parker, I'd like to court you properly, if that's amenable to you. Olivia couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. Amenable, Reid Paxton, I think we're well past amenable, but yes, she added, growing serious again. Yes, I would like that very much. His smile deepened, and he raised their joined hands to press a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The simple gesture sent a shiver of delight through her entire body. How long? She asked. How long until you return to Mercer Creek? 2 weeks, he promised. 3 at most if there are complications with the prisoner's processing. I have accumulated leave time I've never taken. The Rangers owe me a rest. 2 weeks, she repeated, committing the time frame to memory. I'll hold you to that, Ranger Paxton. His expression grew solemn. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep, Olivia. The intensity in his voice, the certainty of his conviction, made her breath catch. Acting on impulse, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a brief, sweet kiss. Reid froze for a heartbeat, clearly surprised by her boldness, then responded with gentle pressure, his free hand coming up to cradle her cheek. The kiss remained chaste but carried a wealth of promise, of possibilities yet to be explored. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Olivia saw in Reid's eyes the same wonder she felt that amidst all the violence and hardship of the frontier, they had found each other. 2 weeks, she whispered again, this time a promise of her own. The next morning brought both parting and promise. Cooper would escort Olivia to Mercer Creek, a half-day's ride to the southwest, while Reid and Mitchell would take the prisoners eastward toward Fort Worth. The Rangers made their preparations efficiently, speaking in the shorthand of men accustomed to working together. As they prepared to go their separate ways, Reid drew Olivia aside for a private farewell. Cooper will see you safely to town, he assured her. He's one of our best. I know you wouldn't entrust me to anyone less, she replied, and you'll be careful on your journey. Reid nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. 3 prisoners with 2 Rangers escorting them is favorable odds, will be fine. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. I want you to have this, until I return. He pressed a small object into her hand, a simple silver ring with a Ranger's star engraved upon it. My father's, Reid explained as Olivia examined it with wonder. He was a lawman back in Pennsylvania, gave it to me when I joined the Rangers. Said it would remind me what the star stands for: honor, justice, protection of the innocent. Olivia closed her fingers around the ring, understanding the significance of such a gift. I'll keep it safe until you return. I know you will. His voice was rough with emotion. Just as I'll keep this. He produced the stone she had returned to him the day before. They stood together for a moment longer, reluctant to part, yet secure in the knowledge that their separation would be temporary. Finally, Reid bent and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. 2 weeks, he reminded her. I'll be waiting, she promised. The ride to Mercer Creek with Cooper was pleasant enough, the Ranger proving to be good company with his dry humor and interesting stories of his years enforcing the law on the frontier. By mid-afternoon, they crested a hill to see the town spread out in a verdant valley below them, a collection of wooden buildings surrounding a central square, with scattered farms and homesteads dotting the surrounding countryside. "Not much to look at compared to Boston," Cooper commented, "but good folks live here, been trying to build something worthwhile." "It's perfect," Olivia said, and meant it. After all she'd endured to reach this place, the simple wooden buildings and dusty streets looked like the promised land. Their arrival caused a stir, townsfolk emerging from shops and homes to see who was riding in. Cooper led Olivia directly to the mayor's house, a modest two-story structure with a small garden out front. Mayor Thompson proved to be a jovial, round-faced man with a genuine enthusiasm for education. His wife, a kind woman with prematurely silver hair, immediately took Olivia under her wing. "We've been so worried when you didn't arrive as scheduled," Mrs. Thompson explained as she showed Olivia to a guest room where she would stay until more permanent arrangements could be made. Then Ranger Paxton's message arrived explaining what happened. "How terrible for you, my dear." "It was," Olivia acknowledged, "but it ended as well as it could have, thanks to Ranger Paxton." Something in her tone must have conveyed more than her words, for Mrs. Thompson gave her a knowing look. "He's a good man, by all accounts, one of the few rangers who's respected even by those who generally distrust authority." Olivia fingered the ring in her pocket, a smile touching her lips. "Yes, he is." Over the next few days, Olivia settled into life in Mercer Creek. The schoolhouse was indeed nearly complete, a simple but solid structure with large windows to admit light and fresh air. The town council formally offered her the teaching position, with a modest salary and a small cabin that would serve as her residence once finished. She met her future students, 23 children ranging in age from 6 to 16, all eager for the education their parents had sacrificed to provide. Many of the older ones had received some schooling back east or from parents, but the younger children would be starting from the beginning. Olivia threw herself into preparations for the school's opening, scheduled for the following month. She ordered books, developed lesson plans, and worked alongside the town's carpenter to design desks and benches for the classroom. The work kept her busy during the days, but in the evenings, her thoughts inevitably turned to Reid and the promise of his return. 2 weeks passed, then 3 with no word. Olivia tried not to worry, reminding herself that communication was difficult in the vast spaces between settlements, and that many things could delay a journey without implying disaster. Still, she found herself watching the road into town with increasing anxiety as each day passed. It was nearly a month after their parting when a rider appeared on the northern road, a solitary figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Olivia, who had been helping plant a garden behind her newly completed cabin, straightened with a hand shading her eyes, her heart pounding with recognition even before she could make out details. She knew that posture, that way of sitting a horse. Without conscious thought, she found herself running toward the town's edge, heedless of her dirt-stained apron and loose hair. Reid saw her coming and dismounted, waiting as she approached. He looked tired but whole, his face more deeply tanned than when she'd last seen him. As she drew closer, she could see new lines around his eyes, but they crinkled with warmth as their gazes met. "You're late," she said when she reached him, slightly breathless from her run. "I know," he replied, his voice carrying a note of regret. "There were complications." Only then did she notice the healing cut along his jawline and the way he held his left arm stiffly at his side. "You were hurt again," she stated rather than asked. Reid nodded. "One of the prisoners had friends waiting on the trail. They tried to free him." A grim smile crossed his face. "Didn't succeed, but they made things interesting for a while." Olivia wanted to be angry at the delay, at the danger he had faced, but all she felt was profound relief that he stood before her now, alive and whole enough to make the journey to her. "You're here now," she said softly. "That's what matters." Something in his expression shifted, tension draining away to be replaced by a tenderness that made her breath catch. "I told you I keep my promises, Olivia." They stood for a moment, drinking in the sight of each other after weeks apart, acutely aware of curious gazes from townsfolk passing by. Finally, Olivia remembered her manners. "You must be exhausted. Come, Mrs. Thompson has prepared a room for you at the boarding house. We expected you." Well, sooner, but the room has been waiting. Reid raised an eyebrow. You told them to expect me. A blush rose to Olivia's cheeks. I may have mentioned you would be coming to check on my welfare. A slow smile spread across his face. Very proper of you, Miss Parker. I thought so, she agreed with a small smile of her own. As they walked toward the boarding house leading his horse, Reid glanced around the town with approval. It's a good place, he commented. Solid buildings, clean streets, people seem industrious. It is good, Olivia agreed. The people have been welcoming and they value education. The children are eager to learn. She hesitated, then added more softly, I think I can be happy here. Reid's eyes found hers serious now. I'm glad. That's important. At the boarding house, Mrs. Thompson greeted Reid warmly, showing him to a comfortable room on the second floor. Olivia left him to rest and clean up, promising to return for dinner, which Mrs. Thompson insisted on hosting in honor of their guest. That evening, dressed in her best gown, a deep green calico with lace trim she'd purchased from the general store with her first wages, Olivia arrived at the Thompson home to find several other town notables had been invited as well. The mayor, the town doctor, the banker and his wife, and the reverend were all eager to meet the ranger who had not only helped eliminate the threat of Blackburn's gang, but also rescued their new schoolteacher. Reid, freshly shaved and dressed in a clean shirt and vest, his gun belt conspicuously absent in deference to the social occasion, bore the attention with quiet dignity. He answered questions about the ranger's work without embellishment, deflected praise for his role in Olivia's rescue, and showed genuine interest in the town's development. Throughout the evening, Olivia was acutely aware of his presence across the room, of the occasional glances they exchanged when others were engaged in conversation. There was something both frustrating and delicious about maintaining proper distance, while sharing the private knowledge of what had passed between them in the canyon. After dinner, as the evening wound down, Mayor Thompson suggested a stroll in the garden for his guests to enjoy the mild spring night. In the natural reshuffling of the party, Olivia found herself walking beside Reid along a path lined with newly planted rose bushes, momentarily separated from the others. How long can you stay? She asked, the question that had been burning in her mind all evening. Reid glanced ahead to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. I've taken a month's leave, he said. After that, I don't know yet. Hope flared within her. A month is a good start. He looked down at her, his expression serious despite the small smile playing at his lips. I thought so. Gives us time to become better acquainted. Olivia felt warmth rising to her cheeks at his deliberate choice of words. Yes, I suppose it does. She hesitated, then added, the school term begins next week. I'll be busy during the days, but the evenings. I'll make myself useful around town, Reid assured her. Get to know the people, the lay of the land. His hand brushed against hers as they walked, a brief electric contact, and I'll look forward to those evenings. Their conversation was interrupted by the reverend calling them to rejoin the group, but the promise in Reid's words lingered between them, sweet as the scent of the roses they passed. The following weeks unfolded with a gentle rhythm that felt both novel and somehow inevitable. Reid took a room at the boarding house on a monthly basis and quickly made himself useful around town. His skills as a former cavalry officer and ranger proved valuable. He helped the town marshal organize a more effective watch system, advised farmers on protecting their livestock from predators, and even assisted in breaking a particularly spirited horse for the blacksmith. Olivia, meanwhile, threw herself into the opening of the school. The first day found her standing nervously before 23 children of varying ages and backgrounds, but her natural talent for teaching quickly asserted itself. By the end of the week, she had established a routine that allowed her to divide her attention effectively between beginners learning their letters and older students tackling more advanced subjects. Each day after school, Reid would appear to walk her home, listening with genuine interest as she recounted the day's challenges and triumphs. Sometimes they would stop at the general store or the small cafe that had recently opened, sharing coffee and conversation as the afternoon light faded. In the evenings, They often joined other townsfolk for social gatherings, dinner at the Thompson home, community meetings at the church, or simple gatherings on front porches as neighbors shared news and music. Through it all, they maintained a proper distance in public, their growing relationship evident only in exchanged glances and the occasional brush of hands. But there were private moments, 2 walks along the creek that ran behind Olivia's cabin, conversations that stretched late into the evening as they sat on her porch, protected from curious eyes by the gathering darkness. During these times, they spoke of deeper things: Reid's experiences in the war and as a ranger, the losses and triumphs that had shaped him. Olivia's childhood in Boston, her parents' progressive beliefs, and her dreams for the future. 2 weeks into his stay, on a warm Saturday afternoon with no school duties to attend to, Reid suggested a picnic in a meadow he'd discovered while exploring the area. Olivia readily agreed, packing a basket with bread, cheese, and preserves supplied by Mrs. Thompson, who gave her a knowing wink as she handed over the provisions. The meadow proved to be a small paradise, a grassy expanse dotted with wildflowers, bordered by cottonwood trees that provided dappled shade along one edge. A small tributary of the main creek burbled nearby, its gentle sound a soothing backdrop to their conversation. As they finished their meal, sitting side by side on a blanket spread beneath one of the larger cottonwoods, Reid grew uncharacteristically quiet, his expression thoughtful as he gazed out across the meadow. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Olivia asked, touching his arm lightly. Reid turned to face her, his blue eyes intent. "I've been thinking about what happens when my leave ends." Olivia's heart quickened, both in anticipation and apprehension. They had carefully avoided this topic during his stay, content to enjoy the present without dwelling on the future's uncertainties. "And what conclusions have you reached?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden dryness in her throat. Reid shifted to face her more directly. "I've served the Rangers for 8 years," he began. "Given them the best years of my youth, tracked down men who needed catching, brought some measure of justice to this part of the country." He paused. "I'm proud of that work, but lately I've been thinking it might be time for someone else to carry that burden." Hope bloomed in Olivia's chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "What would you do instead? The marshal here is getting on in years," Reid said. "Mentioned to me yesterday that he's been thinking of retiring, moving to San Antonio to live near his daughter." A small smile touched his lips. "Suggested I might be a good replacement." "And would you," Olivia asked softly, "want to be Mercer Creek's marshal?" Reid reached for her hand, enfolding it in his larger one. "I would if I had sufficient reason to stay." His eyes held hers, leaving no doubt about who that reason might be. Olivia's breath caught. "I think," she said carefully, "that would be a very sensible decision." "For the town, of course." "Of course," Reid agreed, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "For the town." The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken feelings, with possibilities on the verge of becoming realities. Reid's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in his expression. Olivia answered by leaning forward slightly, an invitation he immediately accepted, closing the distance between them to capture her lips in a kiss far less restrained than their first had been. His hand came up to cradle her cheek, and she found herself melting into his touch, her own hands rising to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. The kiss deepened, months of growing attraction and weeks of careful restraint giving way to a passionate exploration that left them both breathless when they finally parted. "I've wanted to do that again since that night in the canyon," Reid admitted, his voice rougher than usual. "I've wanted you to," Olivia confessed, her cheeks flushed but her gaze direct. Reid's thumb traced the curve of her lower lip, his eyes darkening at her candor. "Olivia Parker, you continue to surprise me," she smiled, feeling bolder than she ever had in Boston society. "Good." "I would hate to become predictable." Reid laughed, the sound rich and genuine in a way she'd rarely heard from him. Then his expression grew serious once more. "I need to return to Austin at the end of the month to formally resign my position and settle my affairs," he said. But then, if you're agreeable, I'd like to return to Mercer Creek, permanently. I am very agreeable, Olivia assured him, her heart so full it seemed impossible her chest could contain it. Very agreeable indeed. The rest of the afternoon passed in a sweet haze of conversation interspersed with kisses, both of them reveling in the freedom to express the feelings that had been growing since that fateful day in Dalhart. By the time they packed up their picnic and headed back to town, the sun was low in the sky, bathing the landscape in golden light that seemed a fitting accompaniment to their newfound happiness. The following weeks passed in a blur of contentment. Reid spoke with the town council about potentially taking over as marshal when old Marshal Jenkins retired, receiving enthusiastic support from Mayor Thompson and the other civic leaders. Olivia's school flourished, her students making rapid progress under her attentive guidance. In the evenings, they continued their walks and conversations, now punctuated with more frequent touches and stolen kisses when privacy allowed. They kept their growing relationship discreet, mindful of Olivia's position as the town's teacher and the expectations of propriety that came with it. But close observers like Mrs. Thompson clearly noted the change in their interactions. "He looks at you like you hung the moon and stars," she commented to Olivia one evening as they prepared vegetables for dinner. "Reminds me of how my Henry used to look at me when we were courting." Olivia smiled, unable to hide her happiness. "He's a good man. The best kind, Mrs. Thompson agreed. "One who knows the darkness of the world but chooses light anyway." She patted Olivia's hand. "Hold on to that one, dear. They don't come along often." All too soon, the end of Reid's leave approached. The night before he was to depart for Austin, they sat together on Olivia's porch, the warm summer evening wrapping around them like a comfortable blanket. "It's only for 2 weeks," Reid reminded her, his arm around her shoulders as they watched fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. "Just long enough to formally resign, collect my things, and settle any outstanding business." "I know," Olivia said, leaning against his solid warmth. "It's foolish to feel so apprehensive when we were apart for nearly a month before." Reid pressed a kiss to her temple. "Not foolish." "I feel it too." He shifted slightly to face her. "But I want to do this properly. Leave the Rangers with honor, tie up loose ends, come back to you free and clear." Olivia nodded, understanding his need for closure with that chapter of his life. "And when you return." Reid's eyes held hers in the dim light. "When I return, Olivia Parker, I intend to ask you a very important question, one that, if you answer favorably, will ensure we won't have to say goodbye again." Her heart stuttered, then raced ahead. "I think I might already know my answer," she whispered. Reid smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face with tender fingers. "Even so, I'll ask properly when I return, with a ring and everything, as befits a Boston lady." Olivia laughed softly. "I'm not sure I qualify as a proper Boston lady anymore, not after shooting at cattle rustlers with Mrs. Thompson's husband's rifle last week." Reid's eyebrows shot up. "You did what?" "Oh, didn't I mention that?" Olivia asked innocently. "Some rather unpleasant men thought the school's money box might be worth stealing while you were helping the blacksmith that day. They didn't expect the schoolteacher to have learned how to handle a rifle." Reid stared at her for a moment, then threw back his head and laughed. "Olivia Parker, you are the most remarkable woman I've ever met." "I'll take that as a compliment," she said primly, though her eyes danced with mischief. Reid's laughter subsided to a warm chuckle as he drew her closer. "It absolutely was." He kissed her then, a lingering promise of all that waited for them once he returned. The morning of Reid's departure dawned clear and bright, a perfect summer day that seemed at odds with the heaviness in Olivia's heart as she prepared to bid him farewell. They had agreed he would stop by her cabin before riding out, allowing them a more private goodbye than the town square would permit. He arrived just after sunrise, his horse saddled and ready for the journey. Olivia met him on the porch, trying to keep her expression brave despite the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. 2 weeks, Reid reminded her, taking her hands in his. "I'll be back before you know it." "I'll hold you to that, Ranger Paxton," she replied, managing a small smile. Reid reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you. to remember me by while I'm gone." Olivia unwrapped it carefully to reveal a small silver locket on a delicate chain. Inside was a tiny photograph of Reid, solemn-faced in his ranger uniform, clearly taken some years earlier in a studio. "It's not much," he said, almost apologetically, "but I wanted you to have something of me to keep close." "It's perfect," Olivia whispered, deeply touched by the gesture. She immediately fastened it around her neck, the weight of it against her collarbone a tangible reminder of his promise to return. "And I have something for you as well." She reached into her pocket and withdrew his father's ranger ring, which she'd kept safe since their parting at the canyon. "You should take this back now, for the journey." Reid looked at the ring for a long moment, then closed her fingers back around it. "Keep it," he said softly. "I'll collect it when I return along with your answer to my question." The implication was clear: the ring would have new meaning when he came back. Olivia's heart swelled with emotion as she nodded, tucking the precious object back into her pocket. Their goodbye kiss was bittersweet, tender yet tinged with the ache of separation. When they finally parted, Reid mounted his horse with the fluid grace she had come to associate with him, turning once in the saddle to meet her gaze. 2 weeks, he said again, his voice carrying the weight of a vow. "I'll be waiting," she promised, echoing her words from their first parting. As she watched him ride away, Olivia touched the locket at her throat, already counting the days until his return. Unlike their first separation, this one carried no fear, only anticipation for when Reid Paxton returned. It would be not as a ranger passing through, but as a man coming home. True to his word, Reid returned to Mercer Creek exactly 14 days later, riding in just before sunset with a packhorse trailing behind him, laden with his worldly possessions. Olivia, who had been watching the road with increasing anticipation all day, ran to meet him at the edge of town, propriety forgotten in her joy at seeing him again. Reid dismounted in one smooth motion and caught her in his arms, lifting her briefly off her feet in an embrace that spoke volumes about how much he had missed her. "You're back," she said unnecessarily, her hands framing his face as if to assure herself he was really there. "I told you I would be," he replied, his eyes drinking in the sight of her, "and I come bearing news." "Good news, I hope," she asked, though his smile had already given her the answer. "The best," he confirmed. "I am officially a former Texas Ranger." And he reached into his pocket and produced a folded document, officially appointed as the new marshal of Mercer Creek, effective immediately. "Mayor Thompson sent the paperwork to Austin while I was there." Olivia's face lit with delight. "So you're staying, really staying?" "I am," Reid confirmed, his expression growing more serious. "But there's something I need to ask you first, something important." Olivia's heart began to race as Reid took her hands in his, unmindful of the curious gazes of townsfolk who had noticed their reunion. "Olivia Parker," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "When I first saw you on that auction block in Dalhart, something inside me recognized you not just as someone who needed saving, but as someone who might save me in return. These past weeks have only confirmed what I think I knew even then, that you are the woman I've been waiting for all my life." He released one of her hands to reach into his vest pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. "I know this is fast by Eastern standards," he continued, "but out here, we've learned not to waste time when something truly matters." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant gold ring with a small diamond that caught the evening light. "Will you marry me, Olivia? Make a life with me here in Mercer Creek?" Tears of joy welled in Olivia's eyes as she nodded, temporarily unable to speak. When she found her voice again, it was steady and certain. "Yes, Reid Paxton. Yes, I will marry you." His face broke into a smile of such unguarded joy that it transformed his usually solemn features, making him look younger and more carefree than she had ever seen him. With slightly trembling hands, he slipped the ring onto her finger, where it settled as though it had always belonged there. Then he was kissing her, right there on the main street of Mercer Creek, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other wrapped around her waist, drawing her close against him. Olivia kissed him back without reservation, too happy to care about the spectacle they were creating. A cheer broke out around them, and they separated to find that quite a crowd had gathered, Mrs. Thompson wiping tears from her eyes, Mayor Thompson beaming approvingly, and various townsfolk watching with expressions ranging from amusement to genuine delight. "Well," said Mrs. Thompson, stepping forward, "I think this calls for a celebration. Dinner at our house tonight, and we'll start planning a proper wedding." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. With Mrs. Thompson's enthusiastic assistance, Olivia planned a simple but beautiful ceremony to be held in the town's small church. Reid, meanwhile, settled into his new role as marshal, quickly earning the respect of the townsfolk with his fair but firm approach to maintaining order. They decided on a September wedding, when the summer heat would have begun to ease, but before the autumn, rains made travel difficult for guests coming from neighboring towns. Reid had few family members to invite, just a cousin in San Antonio and an elderly uncle in El Paso, but several of his former ranger colleagues promised to attend, including Mitchell and Cooper, who had been instrumental in their story. Olivia had no family left, but she had formed close friendships with several women in town, particularly Mrs. Thompson and the doctor's wife, who helped her prepare for her new role as both the town's teacher and its marshal's wife. The day before the wedding, a surprise arrived in the form of a stagecoach carrying Tommy Wilkes, the young horse thief who had been among the prisoners Reid had transported to Fort Worth months earlier. "Judge gave me 5 years," he explained when Reid found him waiting nervously outside the marshal's office, "but suspended the sentence on condition I find honest work and stay out of trouble." He shuffled his feet, eyes downcast. "Thought maybe you might know somewhere that could use an extra pair of hands. I'm good with horses and I can learn other things quick." Reid studied the young man thoughtfully. "The livery stable's looking for help," he said finally. "Owner's getting too old to manage alone." "It's hard work for low pay, at least at first." Tommy's face lit up. "I don't mind hard work, sir, and I won't cause any trouble, I swear it." Reid nodded, decision made. "I'll speak to Mr. Collins at the stable, but understand this, I'm vouching for you. You step out of line, it reflects on me. And more importantly, on my soon-to-be wife, who for some reason thinks you deserve a second chance." Tommy's expression grew solemn. "I understand, sir. I won't let either of you down." True to his word, Reid arranged for Tommy to work at the livery stable, even finding him a room to rent above the saddle shop. The young man's presence at their wedding the next day, seated quietly at the back of the church, but radiating genuine happiness for the couple, was a fitting symbol of the life they were building together, one where justice and compassion worked hand in hand. The ceremony itself was everything Olivia had dreamed of: simple, meaningful, and surrounded by people who had become her community. She wore a new dress of ivory silk ordered specially from San Antonio, with lace at the collar and cuffs that Mrs. Thompson had declared perfectly elegant without being ostentatious. Reid, standing at the altar in a new black suit, his silver marshal's badge polished to a high shine on his vest, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such reverent joy that Olivia felt tears threatening to spill from her eyes. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, the connection between them seemed to vibrate with possibility of a shared future, of a life built together through choice and commitment rather than chance or circumstance. Their vows were traditional but spoken with deeply personal meaning, each word a promise neither intended to break. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Reid's kiss was tender but thorough, drawing good-natured laughter and applause from the assembled guests. The celebration afterward at the Thompson home was joyous, with music provided by local musicians and enough food to feed half the county, thanks to the combined efforts of the town's women. Dancing continued well into the evening, with Reid surprising Olivia by being a more than competent dancer despite his claims to the contrary. "Where did you learn to waltz?" she asked as he guided her smoothly around the makeshift dance floor in the Thompsons' large parlor. A smile quirked the corner of his mouth. "My mother insisted all her sons learn proper social graces even after we moved west, said just because we lived on the frontier didn't mean we had to act like savages." Olivia laughed, delighted by this new glimpse into his past. I wish I could have met her. She would have liked you, Reid said with certainty. Strong women always recognize each other. As the evening waned, they slipped away from the celebration to the small house Reid had purchased on the edge of town, a modest but well-built structure with a wide porch and room for expansion as needed. It would be their home, a place where the schoolteacher and the marshal could build a life together. Standing in the doorway of what was now their bedroom, Olivia felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Despite all they had shared, danger, conversation, growing love, this was unexplored territory for them both. Reid seemed to sense her momentary hesitation, for he crossed to her with deliberate steps and took her hands gently in his. "We have all the time in the world," he said softly, his eyes holding hers with unwavering tenderness. Olivia's nervousness melted away, replaced by certainty. "Yes," she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "A lifetime, in fact." The months that followed their wedding were filled with the sweet rhythm of building a life together. Olivia continued teaching, her school now numbering nearly 30 students as more families moved to the growing town. Reid proved to be an effective marshal, his reputation as a former ranger ensuring that most potential troublemakers gave Mercer Creek a wide berth. In the evenings, they would share the events of their days over dinner, then sit together on their porch watching the sunset, or read aloud to each other from books Olivia ordered from back east. Sometimes they would simply sit in companionable silence, Reid cleaning his weapons while Olivia graded assignments, the quiet domesticity a balm to them both after their respective hectic days. Their home gradually transformed from a house to a home, with curtains at the windows, bookshelves Reid built himself lining one wall of the parlor, and a garden Olivia tended in the backyard. By the following spring, they had added a small stable where they kept their horses, and a milk cow Reid had surprised Olivia with on her birthday. It was on a warm April evening, nearly a year after their wedding, that Olivia shared news that would change their lives once more. They had been discussing the possibility of expanding the school to accommodate the town's growing population when she set aside her teacup and reached for Reid's hand. "I've been thinking," she began, an unfamiliar nervousness in her voice, "that I might need an assistant at the school come autumn." Reid looked puzzled. "The town council mentioned hiring a second teacher next year, but I didn't think they'd made a decision yet." Olivia smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "That's not exactly what I meant." She placed their joined hands over her still flat stomach. "I'll need help because I expect to be rather occupied with another matter around November." Reid's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension, then to a joy so pure it nearly took her breath away. "A baby," he whispered, as if saying it too loudly might make the news evaporate. "We're going to have a child," Olivia nodded, her own happiness reflected in his shining eyes. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be certain before I told you." Reid was on his knees beside her chair in an instant, one hand still clasped in hers while the other gently, reverently touched her abdomen where their child grew. "Olivia," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. I never dared hope for such happiness." She leaned down to press her forehead against his, sharing this perfect moment of connection. "Nor I," she admitted. "When I came west, I was seeking independence, purpose. I never imagined I would find a partner, a love like this." Reid rose enough to capture her lips in a kiss that conveyed all the emotions words couldn't express: gratitude, joy, wonder, and above all, love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings into something enduring and profound. That November, as the first snowflakes of winter dusted Mercer Creek, Olivia gave birth to a son they named James, after Reid's father. The boy had his mother's golden hair and his father's blue eyes, and from his earliest days showed signs of having inherited both parents' determination and spirit. The years that followed brought more children. A daughter, Sarah, arrived 2 years after James, followed by twins, William and Elizabeth, 3 years later. Their home expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Reid adding rooms as needed, his hands building the shelter that housed the people he loved most in the world. Olivia eventually trained a younger woman to take over most of her teaching duties, though she never fully retired from education, continuing to develop curriculum and mentor new teachers as Mercer Creek grew from a frontier settlement into a proper town. Reid served as marshal for 15 years before passing the badge to a younger man fittingly, Tommy Wilkes, who had proven himself a trustworthy citizen and natural leader during his years in town. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set over the hills beyond town. During one such evening, as James practiced his roping skills while the younger children engaged in a spirited game of tag, Reid turned to Olivia with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked. "How close we came to never meeting. If I hadn't been tracking the Waller gang, if I hadn't arrived in Dalhart on that particular day." Olivia reached for his hand, the years having only deepened the connection that flowed between them with the simplest touch. "I prefer to think it was inevitable," she said. "That in any version of our lives, we would have found each other eventually." Reid smiled, the lines around his eyes now speaking of years of laughter rather than hardship. "You still surprise me, Olivia Paxton, even after all these years." "Good," she replied, leaning against his shoulder as they watched their children living embodiments of the love that had begun on that auction platform in Dalhart, where a ranger had looked at a captive schoolteacher and declared her more innocent than them all. "I would hate to become predictable." Reid's laughter joined hers, rising into the twilight air, the sound of a happiness neither had dared to dream of, but which they had built together, choice by choice and day by day, into a life of profound contentment and enduring love.